just to go back to the beginning, maybe, what got you interested in criminal psychology?
Well, if you look at my trajectory into academia and then through it, basically what happened is I was ready to go study art. That's what
Nice.
happened. I had my portfolio ready to go. I was going to go study art at undergrad. And then my grandfather intervened and was like, being an artist is a really hard life. Maybe you should reconsider.
What kind of art? Sorry to take that tangent.
Painting.
That is fast. I would not have expected that because you're so super analytical.
Yeah, I am. But I really like surrealism and I really like messing with sense of reality, which again is obviously something that then wove its way into my academic work.
That's pretty cool.
But he was also right. I mean, I've always been very intellectual, let's just say. I skipped a couple of grades in school. I was part of the chess club. Like it was very much, I was the clever kid. And so, but there's also part of me that's just like, but art is beautiful. I love making art and it can speak to so many people. Anyway, my grandfather convinced me not to do it. And then I applied instead for psychology. Although at that point you just had to say social sciences. You didn't have to yet specify, but I knew it was probably going to be psychology. And the reason for that was because my dad has paranoid schizophrenia. And so I think one of the reasons I'm so obsessed with this idea of what is real and that is in every way. I mean that in terms of what is real in terms of perceptions of right and wrong, what is real in terms of our own memories of the world, what is real in terms of what happened in a crime, what is real in terms of perceptual abilities and neuroscience, what is real. I mean that in every way. And I think that's because I grew up with someone who had a unique view of what is real in real time. And so seeing that, I think, just affected me profoundly because not only was it very destabilizing in terms of my upbringing, but also it's just in your face that people quite literally are seeing and hearing different things than you. And to not jump from that to what else are people perceiving differently than me, I think would be almost like a missed opportunity. And so I went to study psychology partly to understand that and what was going on there. And then that took me down the sort of reality hole. And honestly, the reason I went to criminal psychology, because I could have gone into any other, the criminal psychologists were the most fun. I feel like lots of psychologists, they took themselves so seriously. And I couldn't. I was like, this isn't the vibe. And so the criminal psychologists they had this gallows humor. They were doing these, like, arguably the most serious of the crimes and the cases, and yet were somehow having fun and having nice lives. And I saw myself and I went, well, I want to do this version. And so I did.
Yeah, that's great to hear that criminal psychologists, because probably they have to really, more than any other subfield, confront the reality of the mind.
And it's often quite procedural. So I'm also much more interested in applied sciences because I like the idea of, what do we do with this information? And the thing that interests me most from a research perspective, I mean, I did my PhD in false memories, so implanting false memories of committing crime, which was the study that ended up going viral because I was the first to do it. And I'd built on a history of people implanting false memories of various kinds of other emotional events. But it was the first time that someone had combined false confessions research and false memory research. And so that was the research of Elizabeth Loftus and Saul Kassin. So false confessions was Saul Kassin and false memories was Elizabeth Loftus. And I was just doing them both at the same time. And the question was, could you get people to believe that they committed a crime that never happened and confess to it? And not just that, but believe that it actually happened, so remember it. And the answer to that, in short, is yes, you can, especially using specific leading and suggestive interview techniques. And so the procedural learning from that, which is what I'm most interested in, that's sort of a party trick to be able to actually do it. And that's just so that you can then take that and go, okay, well, how do we prevent this? And so I've since trained police, lawyers, I've trained people at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, who deal with collective memory. So they deal with hundreds of witnesses at a time in war crimes. And the question is, how do we try to preserve as original as possible memory without contaminating it? Because, or at least without contaminating any more than it already is. And that's where social psychology, I think, excels, is that we have done lots of research on how social settings change what people say and to some extent what people believe. And I think that's also where actually the leap to things like AI, I think, is not far because ultimately the way that we're engaging with large language models is that, and generative AI in general, is that it's structured as a social interaction, it's structured as a conversation most of the time now. And that is what we do. That is literally what I train the police on doing, is how to make sure that you don't distort people's memories in the process and how to ask good questions. And so you get confabulations from both sides now. You get confabulations from AI and from the people. And the problem is that there's a third thing, which is the in-between, that I'm not sure is getting enough attention right now. And I wish that there was more integration of social scientists like me and people who do investigative interviewing and have done it for decades to understand what is happening in the in-between, and so that we can both teach the people and the AI to respond better in that situation.
I mean, that's really interesting. Are you saying that there's a drift of some kind in terms of on both the AI and human side when they're interacting together that we need to be very clear about?
Yes, there is what we've created with Gen AI is basically the ultimate false memory machine. We have created a tailored experience of something that is most of the time telling you what it thinks you want to hear. And then it's uncritically giving that to you. Or, I mean, sometimes, of course, there's, other things where it's sort of appraising whether or not this is truthful or not. But it is giving that to you. And there's no safeguard from you just going, this is truth. And this is my past. Or this is how I remembered it. And the problem is that not only is AI potentially distorting people and their memories, and never mind the factual basis on which they're relying, but it's also the other way around, is that potentially by asking leading or problematic questions, the people are changing how the AI is creating the content, which is in turn, on some fundamental level, potentially having an impact on how it's discerning truth from fiction. And so that's where the false memory in human minds and confabulations in AI, I think, are much more similar than we think. And when I first saw AI confabulate, hallucinate, I was like, this is what people do all the time. It's just that we can't fact check them all the time. We're not in a conversation constantly being like, well, is that quite right? I'm going to use that for my homework, right? So it's both juicy and really troubling.
Well, right now the interactions are pretty ephemeral. They're short lasting, and there's not really a deep memory to the interactions. But this could get a lot worse if the AI is personalized to a degree where it remembers things about you, so that it can then start to, over many interactions, feed the narrative about your past that you construct together with the AI over time.
But you don't even need that. So this is what we find in investigative interviewing, which is police interviewing of witnesses and suspects, is that all you need is a leading question or a suggestive piece of information in a short interaction. Most police officers don't
Interesting.
spend a long time, and they don't have no memory of this person's past. They know basically nothing about them except for things related to the crime. And yet we know that within that very short, maybe half hour, 1 hour interaction, people's stories can change fundamentally. And the problem is that if you have a memory of something, that when you pull it up, in that social interaction, it's sort of live. It's like active.
Mhm.
And when you then finish that interaction, it sets back down. And the thing is that if you put it back in a different way, what's going to happen is the next time you're going to remember the latest version. And you might not realize that it's shifted. And so over time it can shift and you don't realize it, and that's your truth. And that's where even just short interactions can have a profound impact on the human mind.
Wow. So you can modify memories that quickly.
Yeah. We do all the time in experiments.
Okay, can you speak a little bit more to false memory? So, that's just fascinating. So, things happen to us. We humans do things in the world, and then we remember them. And most of our lives, I guess, is lived in memory and remembering the things that happen to us. And you're saying that we can modify the story we tell about the things that happen to us? That's fascinating. So, what do we know about this ability to have false memories?
We know that false memories are common, that they're a feature of a normal, healthy brain. They're not this glitch, they are a feature. And we know that false memories are incredibly common in terms of, if you think about basically any memory. Now, I'm interested in autobiographical memories. This isn't memories of facts. This is memories of experiences, things that you've lived in some way. And of those autobiographical memories, basically every single autobiographical memory you have is false. The question isn't whether it's false. The question is how false. You're despairing over there.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's both beautiful and
Right.
terrifying that nothing is real.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying that everything has a degree of falsehood to it. And this is where sometimes I'll get accused of being like, "Oh, but does that mean we can never use witness statements?" That I'm not saying we can't use any witness statements. I'm just saying that we need to be careful because even if people say things with confidence, it doesn't necessarily mean they're true. Or if they have multisensory details, they're describing in very specific detail what they smelled, what they heard, what they whatever. It doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Most of the time, our autobiographical memories are good enough.
Mhm.
And that's where memory scientists talk about this as gist memory. Our gist memory for events, much like for text, you get the gist of it, right? You're good enough. You generally remember accurately, approximately what happened. But it's when you get to the so-called verbatim details, the specific details of memories, that you find people are often really bad. Now, most of the time, that doesn't really matter because you remember you hung out with a friend, you remember you were at this university, you remember approximately what your favorite cafe was, you remember this important negative or positive event, fine. You don't actually need to know exactly what you were wearing and drinking and saying. But in a criminal justice setting, you do need to remember exactly what you were drinking and saying and doing, right? And so that's where we have this need to break down this human capacity for memory to this level of detail that it's just not made for.
So that's where the verbatim stuff can get you into trouble because with criminal cases, I suppose the tiniest details really matter because then the lawyers can like really zoom in on that particular detail and then you could just make that up. And then the interrogation with a leading question, as you were saying, can just alter your memory of a particular detail and then everything will hang on that detail.
Right. And if that particular detail is someone's face, then that's a really big problem.
Right.
And so and it can also be an entire false memory. And so this is where in my research and in research like mine, we've implanted memories, what we call memories or false memories of experiences that never happened at all. So while most things are modifications of real memories, false memories, complete false memories, are when you think you experienced something that you didn't. And we all have them. We all have some memories that can't be true. And we usually realize them, for example, when we talk to our parents about our childhood, or when we talk to friends and we say, "Remember that time we did this?" And your friend will go, "That happened to me. That didn't happen to you."
Mhm.
And you become what is known in research as a memory thief, where you've stolen somebody else's memory and you've accepted it, or your brain has accepted it as your own. And that's possibly because the other person told it in such vivid detail that you could imagine it. And basically, your brain was like, "Well, this feels real now." And so the next time you thought about that, maybe not the next time, but maybe after a couple of times of thinking about it, you started going, "This happened to me, right?" And then you integrate it into your autobiography.
How hard is it to insert false memories?
Not hard.
Mm.
It's very easy to distort memories or to insert small false memories. It's harder to convince people of entire events, especially specific events. And this is widely debated, exactly how easy it is to implant a specific false memory. It's also one of the big debates around my own research is that when I was writing The Memory Illusion, which was my first book, and the research that was in line with that, there was this huge debate between me and a couple of other academics about what it means for something to be a false memory and how we should talk about the ease with which they're implanted. And that is still one of the biggest scientific debates in our field. And to me, I think that's so the coding stuff is about the difference between what some people call a false belief and a false memory. So I think this thing happened, or I remember this thing happened. And that is a really difficult differentiation often because all we have as social psychologists is what you're telling me. And I can ask you, do you think it really happened or not? Do you believe it really happened? But it's really hard to differentiate. And so I've always thought that you need to ask people about the specifics, like how confident are you in this memory? Do you feel things in this memory? Does it feel like other kinds of memory, right? Sort of describe the nature of this experience rather than being like, do you think this is a real memory? Because that's a hard thing to ask people to do.
So you want to get indirectly as many signals as possible to show that they actually believe the thing happened.
Or that it approximates a memory in their minds. That's right. Rather than just a thing they think kind of sort of happened.
Yeah.
But other people think that it's an easier to differentiate line. So for me, that it's almost impossible to differentiate the two. Other people think it's more clear. And then in terms of the frequency, so in my research, 70% of people became convinced that they committed a crime that never happened or experienced another important emotional event. And that number as well is challenged in that people go, well, does that mean that 70% of people can have false memories like this? And the answer is no, obviously not. That's just in my sample. That's just these specific 6 false memories. And it could be that I think 100% of people are prone to some version of this, just maybe not in this specific study. Right? If I had to come up with different false memories to implant, or if I was a different person myself and people trusted me differently. There's, again, those social factors that make it more or less likely that I'm going to be able to convince you that something happened in your life that you can't remember. And in one study, obviously, I can't capture that. But it also doesn't mean that 70% of the time people are, it might be 1% of the time or 0.1% of the time that people have these complex false memories.
I guess you're just speaking to the fact that, you don't know how representative the sample is. But even with one study, that's a crazy, that's incredible.
Well, it's not just representativeness. It's also that we shouldn't take individual studies in that way.
Sure.
Like, I'm not saying that 70% of people always have false memories either. Like, it just means in this one study, more people than not develop these complex memories.